Hello, I am Kevin J.N. Hughes. I'm joined, as always, by my brother in Christ, my broseph of Arimathea, Sako Gekchen, the OGSG. And today I'm excited because Sako is actually in California right now. He says he's visiting family, but I think he's actually helping ICE deport all the illegals. And I also think that he's here trying to pick up a spicy Latina to copy me because, I mean, who could resist the spicy Latinas? And obviously working on his tan because look at this dude, like looking good, bro. Um, so although I'm sure Armenia, you work on your tan just fine there, but
Oh yeah, I mean in some cases even more because higher elevation. So like
right,
we're
that's
like
true.
on a clear day the sun shines even more intensely, and there's like less cloud protection because yeah, we're like California is at basically very slightly above sea level, whereas Armenia is thousands of feet above sea level. So
That's right. That's right. Mount Ararat is in Armenia, right? Where
historic,
where the Ark of Noah ended
yeah,
up. That's what I thought.
it's basically in historic Western Armenia, which is now in Turkey.
Oh, right. The
Yeah.
Turks. The the okay. I won't say Lord have mercy on the Turks, right?
Yes.
Um all right. Well, we have been going through Ancient Paths TV, who has an ironic name, but nevertheless, we've been going through his video on his couple hour long video on the supposedly on the patristic roots of the Reformed faith, although as we've noted several times now, he's kind of abandoned that project and now he's
Yeah.
just trying to show that the church fathers are straight up wrong. Which
Well,
this is what I find for the most
well,
part.
he sort of flip flops. Like if he thinks
Yeah,
he if he thinks he has some patristic support, he'll try to go for it. But
right.
yeah, he sort of waffles between just brute forcing. Oh well, you know what? The fathers were wrong on this point, and
Exactly.
oh wait, here's a father who agrees with me.
Right. Exactly. So right now we were going through his thing on Saint Emperor Constantine, and he's got a lot of issues with Saint Emperor Constantine. Um, and we covered a lot of it, and then we said that we might skip to the next section, but we've both been super busy, and I got sick for a little while, and neither of us have really had time to make sure there wasn't anything worth covering. So, at least for this time, we're not gonna skip. But what we'll probably do is, I know Sako in particular wants to make sure that we kind of let it play. So I have my notebook so that I can take notes and not forget the points that I want to make. So I
Yeah.
will try to honor Sako's request this time and let this dude talk for a while before I jump in. But I'm gonna be honest with you, man.
Hard. Yeah.
It is really hard because like part of it is because like just to remind my viewers, I used to be a Protestant assistant pastor. I used to teach the a lot of the same stuff that this guy is teaching. I used to be a Calvinist. I used to have a lot of the same fundamental presuppositions. So as a result, when this guy is talking, it's like there are times where I hear like the old, ignorant, not informed, and not sanctified me talking, and I'm just like, oh, shut up. But I have to stop myself. This guy is not me, and he's not who I was, and I just pray for him. But it is
Yeah.
difficult. And then occasionally he makes points that are so bonkers that I don't even think I would have made those points when I was reformed. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's like uh, I feel, I feel like he really dropped the ball on the Eucharist earlier, like because as you yourself mentioned, Kev, Calvinists will deny any association with Zwingli because they'll say we do believe in the real presence, but it's a
Right,
spiritual presence. But I remember you mentioned like they never seem to identify what that even means, do they?
right. No.
In function, because he called out what uh, Dr. Jordan Cooper said when when he had that one. He showed that one post where it says, "Calvinists will say we believe what you believe about the Eucharist. When you stoop down to the ground and pick up the body of Christ with your mouth when it falls to the floor, then I'll believe you." And then he responded to that post by Dr. Jordan Cooper by saying, superstitious beliefs like these about the
Right.
Eucharist. It's like, so do you believe it's Christ's body or do you not?
Exactly. Exactly. You
If you
can
don't,
tell.
if you think it's superstitious to treat the bread and wine with such reverence that you don't want to let a single drop of it spill, etc., that means you don't believe it is Christ's body and blood. Plain and
Exactly.
simple. You believe it's uh like functionally you believe it's symbolic.
Exactly.
Be-
Exactly. I just did a live stream on TikTok and I was talking to a guy about this and he was like, "Well, I'm a Baptist, so I don't believe anything happens in baptism. I don't believe in anything is happening in the Eucharist." And so I was like, "Why do you say sola scriptura then if you don't believe, if you just flat out don't believe what the Bible teaches about these things? Like it doesn't make any sense."
yeah.
And I completely agree with you that like on the one hand I give Calvinists and this guy APTV in particular credit because they do sort of call out Zwinglians and say, well, that's wrong. It's more than that. But then they don't, in practice, they don't seem to think that it is more than that because
And
in practice they
mhm.
then argue the same way that Zwinglians do.
From what I could read of from what I could read of the sort of like the high Calvinist view on this, uh, among like Presbyterians or whatever, for one, the best I could gather is that they believe that what they maybe seem to mean by spiritual presence is that it's not Christ's like corporeal like body and blood, but they believe that the ch- the church is Christ's body and blood, and when people take communion, we're sort of spiritually transported in the spirit up to heaven where we commune with Christ. That seems
Right,
to be what they believe. Like in eating the Eucharist is sort of like a gateway to heaven, and we are transported in the spirit to heaven before the throne of God and commune with Christ. It's
right.
like, um, where does it say that in the Bible?
Right. Exactly. Well, I mean, the Calvinist version of the Eucharistic theology basically was John Calvin's attempt to sort of find a quote unquote middle ground between Zwingli and Luther. So as a
Yeah,
result, like I don't even necessarily think, in a weird way, I don't even necessarily think Calvin is trying to be biblical. He's just trying to bridge this manifest gap that exists in Protestantism, um, because he liked
yeah,
both Luther and Zwingli for different reasons and wanted to
right.
try to create a bridge there.
Right, and it's like, why does like if one is to take that position, and I'm doing my best here to steel man their position, like why would Christ? The metaphor is pertinent here. Why does Christ describe the Eucharist as his body? What would that like? Why bread? First of all,
Right.
right? Wine I can understand, right? Because wine is red; it reminds one of blood. Couldn't It was a Passover meal, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't it be a slaughtered lamb? that,
Right.
like, even if, because somebody could say, oh, but that would be a sacrifice. Not necessarily. It could be just a lamb that's butchered for the meal,
Right.
uh, post Christ, and people just sort of eat it like you would have friends over for some lamb.
Right.
Just don't offer it up as a sacrifice anymore. But when you eat it, you remember the lamb that was like. Wouldn't that be a more pertinent metaphor?
Right. Yeah, if it's just gonna be a metaphor anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, um, and if one takes this sort of Calvinist view of it, like, if the bread itself is not the body, but eating of the bread transports you to heaven as the body, so that you commune with Christ. It's like, couldn't there have been a much simpler way of saying that? Like, in as much as you eat of this, you participate, you are in communion with me.
Right.
Like, you could have literally, it could have literally been that simple. In as much as you eat of this, you participate in my church, which is my church, my body, and you commune in the spirit with me. There could
Exactly.
have been so many better ways to say that, if that's what the intent
Exactly.
was. Yeah. So
No, you're
anyway,
spot on.
yeah. Okay, we can go to Constantine now. I just wanted to bring up the Eucharist because I had since then done some reading into Calvin's institutes and stuff like that. So
Right. Well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. Um, yeah. And I do find Calvin's institutes, like, still today, I do find there to be some helpful stuff in the institutes. Like, I wouldn't read it again now, but I look back fondly on at least sections of it, but it is what it is. All right. I'll start playing the thing.
Is the second, later called the Council of Sirmium, that condemned the Nicene Creed and stated the Father is greater than the Son, not just in his incarnation, but in his being. Jerome wrote, "The whole world groaned and was astonished to find itself Arian."
I just want to point out really quick. I know I said I'd let him talk for a little while, but I do want to point something out really quick, which is that you can see that this guy is sort of contradicting his own narrative because the whole narrative is Constantine comes into the church and then the church becomes corrupt and all this stuff happens. But now he's pointing out that that's not actually how it happened. What actually happened is Constantine came into the church and the church radically transformed the Roman Empire. But then, after the Council of Nicaea, Arianism was actually took hold, and Arianism was actually very prominent, and the church still remained persecuted in different ways for at various times. So there's not this point of departure where, oh, the
right,
church was this way, and then all of a sudden Constantine, and now the church is this totally different thing. And and that reminds me of something else I wanted to say that might not be as quick, but it did remind me of this. I was recently interviewed on a Mormon podcast, and the
yeah,
guy, he was kind of had this similar narrative of like Christianity was this one way, and then Constantine comes in and it's another way, and the quote unquote imperial church is so bad. The imperial church is so bad. And so I said to this guy, I said, okay, well, Jesus tells us to baptize the nations, right? And he goes, yeah. And I said, okay, let me explain to you what baptizing the nations looks like. The Roman Empire was one of the most evil institutions in all of history. Truly just evil, just depraved. I mean, we've talked on this show before about
yeah,
some of it, like the
yeah,
pederasty in Rome, pederasty was just like a common thing.
right,
In fact, there was no word for pedophilia in the ancient pagan world. It was just a common practice. Christians coined the term pederasty to condemn this sin. So that was just, it was rampant. It was, um, the pater familias meant that a Roman man had the authority to literally put his wife to death if he wanted to. Romans would routinely, if they had a baby they didn't want, they would just routinely leave this child to die of the elements in, yeah,
Yeah,
just leave them outside.
as
And
as as the Stoic as the Stoic philosopher Seneca put bluntly, we drowned monstrous births.
yes, exactly. So these were not good people. This was a depraved, terrible society. And and that's to say nothing of all the stuff going on in the Colosseums. That's to say nothing of the
Yeah,
of Emperor Nero, lighting his garden by burning Christians alive to the delight of his dinner guests. Like,
yeah,
this is the kind of empire that people live in. This is the world that Christians were living in. And then Constantine converts to Christianity, and the practice of infant exposure, gone, made illegal. The practice of paterfamilias, gone, written out of Roman law. What does all this terrible empire get replaced with? It gets replaced by something that Saint Emperor Justinian will later call symphony, but the more common term is Christendom. It forged the legal system. It forged the legal system of the Byzantine Empire. It forged the legal system of the West for the next 1,000 years, and it produced the society that gave us the greatest developments in architecture. Architectural developments that, by the way, modern architects cannot recreate. I've seen multiple YouTube videos with modern architects talking about the fact that they cannot create something like the cathedrals or like the Hagia Sophia. They can't. They can kind of conceptualize how it was done, but like even with the technology we have, we either can't or barely can recreate what these people did. It's architectural marvels that have never been replicated. The
but
greatest developments in art, the greatest developments in society, the greatest developments in culture, the greatest developments in law, um, these happened because of Christendom. These happened because Christ called us to baptize the nations, and we did. So it is not a black eye on us that the so-called imperial church existed. No, it is beautiful. It demonstrates the truth of Orthodox Christianity, that we took the worst nations on earth, the worst empires on earth, and turned them into something that changed the world, turned them into something that gave the world rights and beauty and all of
yeah.
these things.
And while uh, no country in the world abolished slavery at that time, it is worth mentioning that under Constantine there was a law that said that on Sundays
Yes,
every office of government in the Roman Empire was to be closed for because it was a holy day, except for one, and that was the office of manumission. This basically the office that you go to if you're a Roman citizen and you have slaves, and you go there to free your slaves.
that's
That's the
awesome.
only office that was left open on Sundays under Constantine.
And that's another thing too, is that Constantine made it illegal for slave owners to force their slaves to work on Sunday. So every Christian, whether they were a slave or a free man, could go to church every Sunday, and there wasn't a thing their master could do about it.
Yeah,
Like, and just imagine going from, so you're living under the triumvirate, you're living under the Roman world prior to Constantine, and you are a slave who has no rights at all. Your master can literally just decide to end your life today if he wants to. You have no rights. Constantine takes the throne. The edict of toleration happens, and now you can walk up to your master on Saturday and say, "Hey, tomorrow I'm going to church," and he has to just let you.
Yeah.
Your pagan master can't do a darn thing to hinder you from going
Right.
to church. By
Yeah.
law. By law. That's the world.
Exactly.
That's how much Christ transforms culture when Holy Orthodoxy is brought to bear on empires. So that's kind of, I guess that's kind of an aside to this guy's point, but it's just interesting to me that he's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, the Roman Empire becoming Christian was so terrible and blah blah blah." No, it wasn't. The Roman Empire becoming Christian is one of the greatest achievements in all of history,
Right.
and it's incredible. And then the fact that and then also the fact that he's all like, well, the church became corrupt, and then he shows by his own, continuing of the
Hmm.
story that, like, no, the church didn't change. In fact, at times the church
Yeah.
continued to be persecuted by these supposedly
Um,
Christian emperors who had political reasons for doing whatever. So, you
I'm gonna give you a little bit of a trolling strategy to use
yeah,
against, um, which will, like, it's trolling, yes, but it also makes a point. Uh, if you're ever talking to a Muslim, ask them why, ask them to make a case for why you shouldn't become Mormon. If you're ever talking to a Mormon, ask them to make a case for why you shouldn't become Muslim. I do that shit all the time, and it always causes like their brain to malfunction.
that's awesome.
Because if you believe that the church sort of became corrupt and just like left the earth, as Mormons would say, or whatever, or as Muslims would say, like the teachings of Jesus were corrupted until their guy Muhammad came and whatever, then it's basically just like you against the other guy that says that, and now it's not just enough for me for you to show like, hey, you Christian, what you believe is wrong. You have to also show me why Mormonism or Islam is right. And
Exactly.
the cases they make are pathetic.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right, because the thing is that if you say that the church disappeared from the earth and had to be restored, then you could insert whatever group and their narrative basically functionally would be the same. Um so that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's interesting too when Muslims make that argument that, well, the the gospels got corrupted and the church was corrupted. The irony of that is that if you read the Quran tells Christians to compare to the gospel that they have. It says compare this to the gospel that you have. And so if Christianity was corrupted, then why was Muhammad able to say, compare this to the gospel that you have? And then, I mean, obviously, Muhammad fails
Right.
that test. Like, if you compare him to the gospel, he is proven wrong. But my point
Right.
is that Muhammad himself isn't saying, well, everything got corrupted and now I have to restore it. That's actually not the way Muhammad even argues. That's the way that
Right.
Muslims today argue, but they're actually
Exactly.
refuting their own Quran by
And
doing so.
this is why I believe Muslims when they say Muhammad was illiterate. Like, yeah, he
Right.
was. Um, like he was making claims about a book he never read.
Exactly.
Like, which is why the two ways to sort of just kneecap both. Okay, I'll real quick before we continue. Two ways to kneecap Islam and Mormonism. To kneecap Islam, ask them uh, deploy the Islamic dilemma, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Was that?
You've heard of the Islamic dilemma, right?
Share it.
Yeah, basically, it's like it's a two-horn dilemma. If Christians and Jews are told to judge by their scriptures to know that
Right.
Islam is true. If Islam is if that's the case, then we go and we judge by the Hebrew Bible and the Christian scriptures, then Islam is false because what our Christian scriptures and Jewish scriptures say clearly contradicts it.
Right.
If our scriptures were corrupted, then then Allah, by way of Muhammad, was telling us to judge by corrupt scriptures, in which case Islam is false. And also, Islam is false on that horn as well, because the Quran says that Allah's words and revelations can't be corrupted or altered.
Right.
Only people can misinterpret them. So either way you swing it, Islam is false.
Exactly.
Boom, Islam is bodied. Now on to Mormonism. Mormonism doesn't just say that the church and the true teachings of Christ and his disciples were lost, but it makes very affirmative claims about entire supposedly lost civilizations in the Americas of
Right.
like Jewish colonists and shit. And when you really call them on, like some of them will make a brave effort to try to like skew some archaeological stuff in their favor, but it's laughable. They'll try to like point to some glyphs on a Native American artifact and be like, "Oh, this looks like Hebrew letters," or
Right.
something. But most of them, if they're being honest, and I've spoken to them, just say, "Yeah, we have no evidence for it, but it's a matter of faith." I'm like, buddy, that's not how faith works.
Right. Exactly.
So you disprove Islam by its own standards, and you disprove Mormonism through history.
Exactly. That's awesome. Yeah. Islam is self-refuting. Mormonism is refuted by the fact that there's simply no evidence. All evidence is contrary to it, and at some point you would just have to believe. And you're right, they do say, well, it's a matter of faith, but the problem is that isn't how faith works. God doesn't ask us
Right.
to believe things that are contrary to reality.
Yeah.
God asks
The
us to God calls us to believe the truth.
right, and the funny thing is that Mormons will read that passage from Paul's letters. He says like faith is hope in things not seen, etc.,
Right.
etc. Like they take it out of context. The funny thing is that Mormons read that passage the same way atheists read it, and thus come to the same understanding of faith that atheists have.
Exactly.
So, so which really adds fuel to the fire of my belief that Mormonism is functionally atheism. It is.
Yeah.
It's basically just like it's basically just like semi polytheistic atheism functionally, because even the even the gods have like flesh and bone bodies and stuff, uh and they don't even control the elements of nature or the laws of
Right.
reality. They just influence or interact with them. There's a really good video I'll send you on uh done by one of the two guys that do inspiring philosophy, where he basically demonstrates that basically Mormonism is just a spiritualized atheism.
So
um
weird.
yeah, okay, back to Constantine. Let's see what.
When Pope Liberius advocated for Athanasius, Constantius imprisoned him. To regain his freedom and office, Liberius not only excommunicated Athanasius, but signed the Sirmium Creed. Apologists for Rome tell us the letters that indicate he did this willingly must be forgeries. The subsequent reign of Julian the Apostate and the end of the Constantinian dynasty weakened Arian political power, so Liberius was succeeded as pope by the pro-Nicene Damasus. This is portrayed as the triumph of righteousness against the political machinations of the Arians. So we're told only Arian sympathizers would complain about him securing his election by hiring a gang to murder 137 of his opponents and having his rival exiled by the emperor. Despite this, his devotion to Mary and the cult of the martyrs have led to him being declared a saint in the East and West. Damasus' secretary and chief apologist was Jerome. When he agrees with the Reformed on the canon and bishops and elders being the same, we're reminded that he isn't.
I'm just gonna point out once again that he doesn't agree with the Reformed on those things, but you know, but we already demonstrated that, so.
Really counted a church father. But in his defense of asceticism, we're told he speaks for the whole church. When Helvidius spoke out against radical asceticism and denied Mary's perpetual virginity, Jerome mocked his position as a theological novelty. Tertullian may have said the exact same thing nearly 2 centuries earlier, but Jerome responded,
Tertullian is a heretic who ended his life outside of the church. We don't have to care what he thinks.
"Of Tertullian, I say no more than that he did not belong to the church."
Boom! Mic drop! Way to go, Jerome.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Jerome would argue the apostles had all forsaken their wives, and not only was Mary a virgin, but so was Joseph. He described all sexual intercourse as unclean.
Well, if Jerome actually said these things, which to be fair, I'm pretty sure he did, I would just point out that in that he's contradicting the rest of the fathers. One church father does not form a consensus. Tradition is that which was practiced everywhere at all times and by all, not what Jerome theorizes about whatever. So Jerome saying that Saint Joseph was a virgin is irrelevant since we know from earlier church fathers that Saint
Joseph.
Joseph had children before he married the
Okay.
Theotokos. So,
Let me
like, these things are
let me
irrelevant.
hold on. Okay, so remember how I mentioned like on Chat GPT there
Yeah,
is there's like different GPTs that people make, like AI models for different reasons or different
right.
purposes. I have a patristic GPT.
Nice.
So I'm gonna actually real quick see if uh I'm gonna see if Jerome did say that sexual intercourse is unclean. Okay. Did Saint Jerome say that sexual intercourse is unclean? Question mark. Please provide citations. Period. All right, let's see what it spits out. It's searching.
While you're looking for that, I'll just point out that
Yeah.
this is a really common thing that Protestants will do. They'll point to like these weird quotes in Saint Jerome or Saint Augustine and be like, well, you guys recognize those guys as saints, so therefore you have to either believe these things are true or whatever. You have to accept that this is part of tradition. We don't because saints can err. The issue is not did
Mhm.
did Saint Jerome or Saint Augustine get every single thing ever correct?
Yeah.
That's not what the consensus is. The issue is what was practiced everywhere at all
Well,
times and by all, which is not what Saint Jerome is practicing here. So this isn't an argument against tradition. At most, this is an argument that Saint Jerome got some stuff wrong. And here's the thing, Saint Jerome did get some stuff wrong. Saint Jerome had some weird practices. Now, was Helvidius wrong even more? Yes. Helvidius was wrong because he created theological novelties and Saint Jerome rightly corrected him. But just like Saint Augustine, Saint Jerome kind of goes too far on some of this stuff. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like the like Helvidius wasn't, as far as I can gather, Helvidius wasn't anti-radical asceticism. He was anti-asceticism. So,
exactly.
like, I don't get what you, um,
Well, according to you have to understand that from a Calvinist perspective, well, they would never say this. Functionally, any asceticism is radical asceticism. When I was Presbyterian, I started fasting twice a week because I found out that the early church did that, and it was super controversial in the church that I went to at the time, and there was one guy who even like tried to rebuke me and said that I shouldn't be fasting and that it wasn't good for me. And I said,
what
well,
good for
this
you?
was part of the early church.
It wasn't good.
And
It wasn't good for you. How?
well, he was saying that I was being legalistic or whatever, that this is legalism, that this is terrible. And I pointed out that this was part of the early church, and he said, "Well, it's unbiblical." And I was like, "What are you talking about? The Bible talks about fasting all over the place." And his argument was, I kid you not, that in the law there's five, what did he say? He said there was 5 feast days and only one fast day, so therefore we should be feasting, not fasting. And I said, by your own logic, if there was 5 fast days, if there, if that's how we're going to create
Mhm.
our week or whatever, then by your own logic, I should, for every 5 fast or feast days, I should have one fast day, which is exactly what I'm doing by fasting twice a week. And he didn't have an answer for that. But yeah, it Calvinists have a really like Calvinists hate the idea of asceticism. I don't really
Mhm.
know why. And I know that what's going to happen in our comment section is there's going to be a whole bunch of Calvinists saying, "No, you're misrepresenting us. You're misrepresenting us. There's Calvinists who fast." But the reality is that in practice, the way that you guys operate is that you don't fast. In practice, if you attend a Calvinist church, you aren't fasting. And, like,
Yeah.
I mean, to the point that I used to attend a Calvinist church that practiced Lent, which you're thinking, like, good on them, but none of them fasted during Lent. Like, Lent was just a liturgical season for them where they would put out some purple cloth or whatever, but nobody was fasting during
Mhm.
Lent, and even on Maundy Thursday, they would get together and have a barbecue where they would serve like steak and all this stuff. So how is that Lent? How is that Lent at all? Like at that point, why even are you practicing Lent, you know?
Yeah.
So it's just so when I say that Calvinists don't fast, I don't mean that there's literally no Calvinist who has ever fasted, but the truth is that by and large, if you go to a Calvinist church, I know you're not fasting. And so this guy, he obviously would identify more with Helvidius and his thing against asceticism than he would
Mhm.
with Jerome, who's defending asceticism.
Yeah, and I mean, us in the East, while we have asceticism, we don't take as dim of a view of things like mar- uh, marital relations,
Right,
enjoying life, like enjoying food, the good things of creation,
exactly.
as Latins is. So it's like, okay, if this is a Latin gripe you have, fine, we can agree on that. That's wrong, and yeah, because of sadly Augustinian influence, the Latin Church at times, I'm not going to generalize here, but at times, sort of communicated this idea that even sex within marriage is like wicked because you're taking part in a wicked fallen act, even if it's a necessary one. That yeah, that is unhealthy. That is grotesque. That can lead to some very unhealthy attitudes towards what is in essence a very wholesome and godly act when done in the proper
Exactly.
context of marriage. So like yeah, we're not afraid to say Jerome was wrong, but guess what? Most fathers, especially those in the East, didn't agree with them. So
Exactly.
um, I don't think he understands what the church is multifaceted when it comes to any sort of doctrine or teaching. So it's not. It's like it's sort of like in the Constitution how there's a balance of powers, right?
Right.
So, so scripture is scripture is first and foremost as like our starting point, not in the only thing that's infallible, but our starting point. And then, but then the interpretation of scripture is you need the church, you need the body of
Exactly.
to interpret the scripture. Otherwise, everybody becomes their own pope essentially. Um, but so it's like a balance of power. So yeah, scripture, which is our starting point. So does it go against scripture
Right.
as historically and properly understood by the church? Um, and we do this by tracing the continuity. We do this by reading the works of like the apostolic fathers are really the golden standard here.
Exactly.
Clement, Polycarp, um, Ignatius, who he doesn't seem to like.
Of course
So
not, because Ignatius refutes Gnosticism.
yeah, Calvinism is like Gnosticism stuck through the back door. But
Exactly.
but I guess like kind of a selective Gnosticism because they like themselves some sticks. So
Right. They're like the hedonist Gnostics.
right. So okay, let's play the video. Let's see where
Well,
he's
I'll
going with
also say the reason it's weird to me that they don't like Ignatius because Ignatius is one of the only church fathers who really talks about predestination. So, like, I remember when I was a Calvinist, I was really I thought it was odd that so many Calvinist apologists didn't like Ignatius because when I read Ignatius, I was like, this is one of the only dudes who talks about our big thing. Now, I mean, all these years later, I know that Ignatius isn't confessing Calvinism. He's not talking about predestination in the same way that Calvinists do. But my point is that, like, it's weird to me because I would think that John Calvin would read Ignatius and be like, finally, somebody in the early church who's talking about this thing I'm obsessed with. But anyway, I guess that's neither here nor there. I'll go ahead with the
Jerome's denunciations of marriage would prevail, and Damas's successor, Siricius, would decree that all priests now had to be celibate. Such radical asceticism was opposed not just by Helvidius, but by Jovinian.
Well, I just want to point out once again, as I have already done at times here, but like he says these things, but he ignores the fact that clerical celibacy was rejected by the church. So just because some bishop said priests should be celibate, clerical celibacy was rejected by the church. Clerical celibacy only even gets accepted at all in the West after they got excommunicated by the church. And the reason that they accept it after that is because they have these Gnostic leanings. But that's all a Western thing. In the East, clerical celibacy was denounced. In fact, clerical celibacy was refuted even by bishops who were noted for being very ascetic. And like in one instance, I forgot his name, but there was a bishop who was widely regarded as one of the most chaste men of his time, and he stood up in the midst of the assembly and denounced the bishops who were talking about clerical celibacy as heretics. So, like the issue of clerical celibacy, uh, I don't know why he's bringing this up as like some sort of defeater against us when again, maybe like you said, maybe he's in this section just talking about Roman Catholicism here, but he's ignoring the
Yeah.
fact that yes, there were bishops who tried to promote clerical celibacy and they were shot down.
Well,
Like the
I mean, I don't know
Universal
if
Church always rejected this.
I don't know if you brought this up because I kind of cut out there for a minute. I had to jump back into the call, but even the Latin West didn't sort of standardize the practice or like make it universally mandatory until the ninth century.
Exactly.
So like even the Latins sort of waffled on this a bit. Um, and yeah, it just
So this is not something that this was never part of the Universal Church. This was something that was exclusive to the West and that was rejected. Like
right. Well,
the church
and
rejected this. It was proposed and rejected by the church. So when he's like, "Well, this bishop," I guess he's saying that it's the Bishop of Rome, so he interprets that as being the head of the church or whatever, but he's wrong
yeah,
about that. But he's like, well, the Bishop of Rome said that they had to have clerical celibacy, so I guess he thinks that that one-ups us somehow, but like
yeah,
you're wrong. Like it's not
um,
this is not the smoking gun that he
yeah.
thinks it is.
Well, I'll let him take that up with the Latins. That's not our fight.
Right.
um, the um, yeah, I just like, when it comes to like asceticism, it's just ridiculous. It's like we know that both in the Old Testament and during the time of Christ, there were ascetics. There were men who lived, dressed in rags or sackcloth or
Right.
animal skins in the wilderness. Some of them were prophets, like Saint John the Forerunner, um, and then numerous unnamed prophets and stuff, and several of them who are named, including Saint John the Forerunner, and many who are unnamed were unmarried. So
Right.
I don't get what this like. At the very least, you have to acknowledge that Paul says that Paul was unmarried, right? Like
Right.
at bare minimum in the New Testament, among the apostles, you have to say that Paul was unmarried, and at bare minimum, you have to acknowledge that Paul teaches that in the sort of hierarchy of holiness, the celibate life is holier than the married life.
Right.
Like, I'm actually kind of curious. Like, did Calvinists ever try to come to grips with that in your time as a Calvinist? Like, how do they sort of respond to Paul's?
To be honest, no, because the truth is that in American Protestantism, there really isn't much of a place for unmarried people. It's just like the life of somebody who isn't married in within Protestantism is in America at least is
Mhm.
very tends to be very lonely and
Yeah.
you're it's not encouraged by any stretch of the imagination. So like the truth is that that passage largely gets ignored within all, not just within Calvinism, but just all American Protestantism. That passage is mostly ignored, and to the extent that people talk about it, it's like you'll occasionally have a conversation with somebody and they'll be like, well, it's actually during this time where you're single, this is the best time to pursue God or whatever. And they'll say something like that kind of offhand, but always with the assumption that at some point you're gonna, get married and do these
Right.
things. There's
But
no sense that like
but
this
but
can actually be a life that you choose.
but but Saint, like, do they ever address Saint Paul's clear favoring of a celibate life over a married life? Like, do they, or do they just ignore it entirely? Like, did you ever see any attempts to address it in your time as a Protestant?
I never saw anybody like preach on it in any kind of way that
Hmm.
like I mean, obviously, there's
Because it's
people
just
who
like,
preach through the whole Bible, so
yeah,
those people eventually get to that passage, but it's very awkward. It's very clear they don't really know what to do with it, and then
right.
they're
Because it's like so in
usually
your face. It's like slapping you in the face like a wet noodle. Like,
exactly,
it's like it's better to be to marry than to burn. It's better, I wish that all of you were as I am, but
right,
like, um now I disagree with the assertion that some Latins, uh, both fathers and otherwise, would have had at the idea that the apostles abandoned their wives, because
right. That would be a
that's
sin.
a yeah, that would be a sin. You can't abandon your wife unless it's like, well, you can't. Okay, first of all, you can't abandon your wife at all if you took a vow to be
Exactly.
their husband, unless both of you mutually agree to, like, there were cases. Okay, for example, Saint Gregory the Illuminator, the one that converted Armenia. Um, his his wife and him mutually agreed to live celibate monastic lives
Right,
when their sons were old enough, like when their sons came into adulthood. They mutually agreed to be celibate, but only after they had fulfilled all of their duties as father, as mother, and as husband and wife.
right,
So, um, I think there are some cases where a husband could become a monk. But even there, if I'm not mistaken, I think some church canons say that he can only do so with explicit permission from his wife. Like, his wife
right,
essentially says, I excuse him from his husbandly duties because he has a higher calling to the Lord. The husband can't just abandon his wife. He can't just be like, I'm sorry, honey. The Lord has called me to live a holy monastic life. I know we just had, I know we have children, but I have to leave
right.
you and kids behind and go off to God knows where preaching the gospel. Like, um,
Exactly. I'm reminded of a monk that I heard one time speaking, and he said that he was a higher monk, so he was a priest, and he said that very often um, people would come to him asking him to perform their wedding, and he would bless their marriage. It was in the church and everything,
yeah,
and then 6 months would go by, 8 months would go by, and now they have, uh, maybe they have, um,
marital
maybe
issues.
she's pregnant, and maybe they've had their first like big marital conflict,
Yeah,
and or maybe even a year has gone by and they have a kid and they've had a conflict or something. And he said that without fail, it's at that point that somebody will come and say, I have been thinking that maybe the monastic life is actually a better calling for me. And he would say, no, you have already given up that. You have already made this covenant before God. And they would say, but Father, it just seems so peaceful. Like it would be so wonderful to have this life of peace. And then his response, he said, my response is always the same. I say, Yes, it is very nice to have this peace. Anyway, you have chosen the life of marriage. And so he would just like straight up just dismiss this notion. Like, no, you don't get this. You just. So the point is that, like, again, this guy is saying that, like, oh, well, these people don't like marriage or whatever. Okay, but that's not the way that the church actually functions. That's not the
Yeah,
way that the Orthodox Church has ever taught, and it's certainly not the way that the Orthodox Church has ever practiced.
right. Yeah, so it's like if the apostles did sort of give up their lives as husbands, which I don't think they did,
No,
like
I don't think so either.
I think Peter and whoever else, they just took their wives and whatever sons or daughters they might have had with them on preaching. That which is like, yeah, I mean, we see that today, missionary families. Like,
Right,
so,
exactly.
but
It's based.
let's say for the sake of argument they did. I'm sure it could have only been done in in the case where like both husband and wife mutually agreed to be celibate and be live a sort of monastic life. So if
Right.
that's what the Latins teach, then yeah, maybe that could have happened with the apostles. I don't know. Um,
Well, I've never actually, I'll be honest, and I could be wrong here.
mhm,
But I will be honest that I did grow up in Roman Catholicism, and I never once heard any, like, priest, any teacher say that the apostles abandoned their spouses. It's possible that some Latin fathers say that. It's possible that some
yeah,
Latin theologians of the past have said that. But, like, I'm not even sure that the Roman Catholic Church today teaches that. Like, I'm not even sure that they're teaching that,
R-
let
right,
alone
right,
like
or if
obviously
it,
we don't, but I don't even necessarily think they do. Like I've never really
right,
encountered that even within Catholicism.
right, and even in cases, and it wouldn't, if it's anything like what we were describing, it wouldn't be abandonment. It would, like,
Right.
you would still, in a weird sense, you would be sort of occupy this weird middle ground where you would almost be like a married monk.
Right.
You just don't have sex with your wife, like, or if it's a case where you go off to a monastery and your wife goes off to a convent. Yeah, you're basically functionally, you're a monk, she's a nun. You can say you were previous. I don't know how that would be worded. Considered, you say you were previously married, but now you live a monastic life, or you're still married under the eyes of God, like you're still under
Right.
the covenant of marriage, but you're separated because of monasticism. I don't know how like, how would you guys in the Eastern Orthodox tradition word that? I'm not sure how we would do it.
Um I mean I know that there are some fathers who they chose at some point to like their wives went to a convent and they went to a monastery and they lived the rest of their days that way.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there are some stories where we find out that, um, like they would go off to their respective monasteries or whatever, and then they'd live out the rest of their days, and then they would actually pass away on the same day. But the way that the Orthodox Church teaches that or treats this is that you're still married because in the Orthodox Church we don't have a concept of quote unquote till death do us part. In the
Mm-hmm.
Orthodox Church, we believe that even after, like when my
Mm-hmm.
wife and I are in glory, we're still going to be married,
Mm-hmm.
whatever exactly that means.
Mm-hmm.
So like marriage is an eternal covenant. You are now one
Mm-hmm.
person together. Um, so this is not like I don't think that you could just say, well, I went off to this monastery now, so I'm not married anymore. Like, no, you're still married. You've taken on this role. Maybe you've been absolved from sort of the duties of marriage, but I think you'd still be considered married.
Right. so that answers that question.
Yeah,
I think I think I think I know why some Latins might have felt the need to sort of speculate that the apostles sort of stopped being husbands, those of them that were married. I
yeah,
think it's because they feel like it would create an maybe they felt like it would create an awkward situation because bishops after the you know at least I'm not sure when it was like codified into canon law, but at some point bishops had to take a vow, had to be celibate, right? So I guess maybe it's like misplaced piety, um, where it's like there's almost this fear of like, okay, well the apostles weren't, if the apostles weren't celibate, but now bishops are bishops trying to one up the apostles, which I don't, think that necessarily follows, but maybe the idea that the apostles became celibate was sort of a way of like avoiding the implication of like one upping the apostles with later bishops,
right,
uh, uh it's like no, because uh this is what we in the East would call economia, like
right,
situations, like you have the general rule and then you have the situation, right? Like here you have these men who were already married and then Christ chose them,
exactly.
and uh and so it's like, but at the same time the Torah demands that husbands be husbands and like that they have their duties, right? So it's like, yeah, it's like you're not saying that later bishops are holier than you. You can affirm two truths at the same time. You can say truth A, celibate life, uh, when devoted to God, is holier than married life, and you can still say B, for
Married life is holy.
yeah, married life is holy, and for reasons of circumstance, i.e., the apostles being married, they continued they continue to fulfill their duties as husbands and fathers.
Right.
So uh it's
Well, and
like,
there have been some, because of economia, it's like there have been some married bishops throughout history, and there could be again,
right,
theoretically. I don't know that there will, but there could be again,
right,
because the thing is that marriage is holy. It is a good thing. The main reason why bishops are usually celibate is because the truth is that for most of church history, like one of the requirements to being a bishop is that you have to have a lot of education and these things. And for most of church history, the people who had that were people in monasteries because that's who had
yeah,
access to those things. So it just sort of made sense to usually have monks be the ones that you were putting up to become bishops, and then over time that became more and more codified. It's there's not some like
yeah, like,
conspiracy where somebody was
I,
like, we need to get these married folk out of the priesthood. That never happened.
right, yeah. So it's like, yeah, there isn't this hard and fast, like I think the idea of a bishop being single is less of an apostolic tradition, more just something that emerged over time as a necessity. This is
Right.
this is one of those things where this is one of those things where uh, for practical purposes, and then there's also like, think about this: if if you're a married person, right, and you have a family, uh, so as you there's a responsibility aspect, as you pointed out. If you're a husband or father, you have certain duties that you have to do. Um, so when are you gonna have time to put in, the hours for requisite study and all these things? But then on top of that, you also have the temptation of ambition, like, because if you're a bishop
Right.
and you're married, and your role as a bishop leads to you getting like donations, or leads to you having some sort of political standing with, say, the emperor or the emperor's family, or I don't know, a governor or something. Um,
You want to put your kids in like a position,
Positions of, yeah, yeah. So for practical purposes, it's good to have bishops that don't have this sort of that won't have this temptation to choose their
exactly.
ambitions for their family over their duties to God, right? Like,
Exactly. Exactly. And, to your point about like responsibilities, even me, like just yesterday, um, I had planned to sit and read and do some study and some prep work for my upcoming debate.
mhm.
And instead, I had to go to the Wilco feed store with my wife and get some stuff for our pets, and then I had to go do some other stuff, run some errands and stuff. And by the time I got
Right.
home, I had a little bit more work that I had to do, and then that was it. I didn't have time to sit and study and these things. And you could say,
Mhm.
well, like you could have sent your wife and had her pick up the stuff herself, and I guess I could have probably done that, but like my point is that practically speaking, when you're married, you have responsibilities that you have to
Yeah.
attend to, and that's fine. That's not a bad thing. That can be a path to
Right.
holiness, but it's not necessarily the path that you want your bishop to be on because he needs to be able to, you know, at the at a moment's notice be at, whatever he needs to have a certain amount of time that he's spent in study so that he can be how can the bishops carry on apostolic tradition and be the keepers and guardians of apostolic tradition if they're ignorant of
Right.
apostolic tradition? It would make no sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Protestants like these have this thing that like the commandment to go forth and multiply is absolute. The commandment is to
Right.
humanity as a whole. So they feel like, oh, but if you're not getting married and having kids, you're not doing your duty to grow the body of Christ, uh, like by way of procreation. But it's like, um, yeah, then I guess Paul neglected his duty. I don't know, like,
And also
uh,
all of the people whose wives are barren are by that
yeah,
logic they'd be
yeah,
neglecting
yeah.
their
So it's
duty.
like, yeah, so it's like, and it really leads to some horrible, horrible psychological, like, um, implications, because it's like, uh, because then like a woman who might be barren, like if she does want kids, right?
Right.
Um, it's already tormenting enough that like she wants kids so bad and she can't have it. So now you might have Pastor Jim Bob over here saying, "Well, clearly, you must have done something. You might have done something wrong, or there's a reason why God has closed your womb, woman." Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? It's like guys like this dude here will go on and on about like like the wrongness of pressuring men to be ascetic, which the church doesn't do,
Right.
first of all, but in their mind it does. But then it's like, but they either directly or indirectly pressure men and women to be married. Like,
Right.
it's like, um, so it's like you have this additional layer of psychological like gaslighting for a woman who can't have kids. Uh,
Or a
yeah,
man who
it,
can't have kids
or
for
or
that
a man
matter.
who can't have kids. Yeah, so it's like, yeah, it's just horrible all around. The church as a collective is doing its duty. If, let's say, you take a slice of the church, right? Let's say you have a country, an Orthodox country of like 10 million people, right? And out of that 10 million people, let's say 50,000 people are monastics,
Right.
or even like 100,000 people are monastics. The vast majority of those people, by the grace of God, are still going to have, if they're doing their marital duty, are going to have plenty of babies to perpetuate the church.
Exactly.
um, the the body of Christ won't suffer that much from 50 to 100,000 people not having kids.
Right. Yeah, I
Especially,
remember this actually
especially if
came up recently. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, especially if those who are having kids are having like 3, 4 kids each. Like,
Exactly. Big families are the answer. But this came up recently because there was a guy who said basically that he felt that because I was talking about the massive growth that Orthodoxy has experienced in America over the last 10 years, and this one guy commented and said, "Well, it basically doesn't matter because most of that is single men, or so much of that is single men. It's actually not necessarily true anymore that most of it is single men
uh-huh,
because married men and married women have also come in, but there's still a huge chunk of it that's single men,
right,
and kind of as a result,
hmm
Orthodoxy is there's more men in Orthodoxy than women right now. And he was
right,
like, so it doesn't even matter because unless we can have kids, this won't matter. And I was like, so all of the monastic saints, they don't matter because they didn't have kids? Like, well, that's not what I mean. Well, it is what you mean, or it's at least what you're saying, because
right,
if your mindset is that nothing matters except having kids, then you aren't really practicing the faith. And that's a problem that'll work itself out because
hmm
like a lot of these guys, they're single, but they'll get married or they'll become monastics or whatever, and then through their prayers, many more people will come into the church,
yeah,
or they'll become very holy before they get married, and then their kids will stay Orthodox. Because that's another thing is just having kids is only half the battle. You have
hmm
to train them up in the faith.
you have to bring them up Orthodox. Yeah,
Exactly. So it won't matter. Like if all of us had 4 or 8 kids, but then we were
hmm
crappy parents to them,
hmm
then we're still not going to be
yeah,
building the church.
yes. All right, let's okay,
Let's do it.
yeah.
Rome reported him as saying, "If any are tempted, it only shows that they were baptized with water, not with the Spirit, as we read was the case with Simon Magus." Rather than recognizing him as differentiating between the sign and substance, Jerome mocks the idea that Christians aren't tempted. But remember, Simon Magus wasn't simply tempted. He made shipwreck of the faith. Jerome had earlier described Jovinian as using the language not of temptation, but of being overthrown of the devil. But we can't read Jovinian in his own words, because the emperor ordered him and his followers to be flogged and had his books burned. In the
Um,
ascetics, emperors found men who could accommodate.
okay, right away, he's like, rather than reading him as differentiating between the sign and the substance, it's called prismation.
Right, exactly.
Prismation.
Exactly. No, it is. But also, like, he it's funny because he takes this person saying this thing and then he's like, he's differentiating between the sign and the substance. No, he isn't. He's just being like, even when he read the quote, though, I was thinking like, oh, Protestants. I'm surprised Protestants don't love that quote because I hear Protestants all the time saying things like, "Baptism is by the Spirit, not by water. Water baptism doesn't matter." And so, like, I was sitting there thinking, oh, I'm surprised Protestants don't constantly quote that thing out of context to try to prove that water baptism is different from spirit baptism, which is something they're always
Yeah.
talking about. But yeah, like you said, no, it's talking about chrismation. I did also think it was interesting, though, that just kind of as an aside, I don't necessarily think APTV is saying this, but the idea that the person he quoted was saying that Simon Magus was not truly baptized or whatever, I'm not sure that that's true. I think Simon Magus received real baptism. He just made a
Mm,
shipwreck of the faith. Like, I don't think
yeah.
Simon Magus I don't think that there was something deficient in his baptism. I think that
Right.
he came into the faith for the wrong reasons, and then that was his wicked heart was exposed.
Right. Let's go back to see if was he quoting Jerome who said that again.
I think so.
Let's double check.
That was kind of a
Uh,
while ago in the thing, I
okay.
think. Let me see.
rather
Here.
than spirit, as we read was the case with Simon Magus.
Okay. It's Jovinian as quoted by Jerome.
Rather than
Oh.
recognizing him as differentiating between the sign and substance,
Oh.
Jerome
Okay.
mocks
Okay.
the
All
idea
right. Well,
that
in
Christians
which
are
case,
tempted.
in which case, fuck what he has to say. He's not a church father.
Yeah.
The amount of respect I owe him is precisely zero.
Right. It's like, okay, some heretic said something. Who cares? Sorry, I wasn't listening. Why? Because a heretic was talking. Oh, that's
Yeah.
hilarious. Javinian, as quoted by Drew. Okay, well, I don't care. Okay, let me try to
Okay.
find where we were. I don't want to listen to that again. Here we go. Okay, this is it.
And in
Okay.
the emperors, the ascetics found those they believed had the power to usher in the kingdom and silence their critics. One of Jerome's disciples,
Except that you just pointed out that a whole slew of emperors were heretics who were trying to silence the church. So which is it? Was the church corrupt and trying to use the state to silence its enemies? Or was the state still persecuting the church? Like, which is it, dude? You can't have it both ways.
Yeah. No, it's like okay. And a bishop using some sort of political power does not mean the church as a whole is corrupted. It just means they're corrupt clergymen. So that's nothing new.
Yeah.
Like
Well, and also I
like
would say that even like I don't
like
even necessarily think it's always corrupt when bishops use political power. Like bishops can use political power for good, like Patriarch Kirill using his relationship with Putin to build hundreds of thousands of orphanages and to
or yeah.
basically, I mean, he's saved thousands of children from abortion by adopting them himself and raising them in orphanages, and he's able to do that because, well, he's able to do that in part because he had wealth before he was clergy, and he basically used all of that, gave all that wealth away to build these orphanages, but
Mm-hmm.
also because he does have connections in politics that that he
Right, right.
uses and leverages to do
Yeah.
good. Like, it's
Well,
not always corruption.
right. Well, in this case, I'm talking about like the misuse of political power.
I
I'm
see.
saying
Yeah.
okay, yeah, like clergy have misused political power. They've done really bad. Like the how many messed up and corrupt priests and high priests of Israel were there?
Right.
Does that mean that the priesthood of Israel was any less established by God?
Right.
Like there were times when the priest was out of line, and the prophet out there in the wilderness was the one in the right. You know, like
Exactly. Well, and
like
let's be honest, it's not like Protestants have never used political power for evil. It's not like Protestants have never
Yeah,
It's not like Protestants are just squeaky clean on this stuff. So
right. Well,
it's sort
well,
of
but I know what they're gonna
disingenuous.
say. I know what they're gonna say. Like, yeah, but yeah, we have, but we believe in the separation of church and state. It's like Martin Luther didn't, Calvin
Right,
didn't.
exactly.
At most, you could say maybe Calvin was anti-monarchist, that but he basically ruled over Geneva. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
so, like Calvin, Calvin was not above using some sort of state power to enforce the faith. Like,
Exactly.
I mean, I'm in a country, at least I have them, like, personally, me, and this is where me and Kev sometimes have like polite disagreements. uh I'm more sort of secular in that respect, where until a critical mass of Christian, where until a critical mass is reached, where the vast majority of the population is demanding enforcement of orthodoxy, I'm pro separation of church and state, because I also know that if we had a Protestant Christian nationalism, we Orthodox would be on that chopping block. So, like, I sort of exercise the golden rule a little bit here, you know. But and that's something that Father Stephen DeYoung said. It's like when he was talking about some Orthodox folks who are pro Christian nationalists. He said, in America, that wouldn't be us. we would be we would probably be persecuted in some capacity. So uh, I think it would only work if a critical mass is reached. Uh, like literally not even just a slight majority, like the majority of people would have to become Orthodox, and then we can make America an Orthodox state. You know?
Yeah, I won't I I don't agree, but I won't say why because it would take me too long to explain,
Yeah.
and we should probably get back to the thing. But I would say that
Mhm.
the only thing that I will say to that is that ironically Baptists, so about the largest still today, the largest percentage of American religiosity is evangelical Christians, which makes up about
Yeah.
25% of the United States. And the irony I find is that evangelical Christians tend to be super against Christian nationalism for the exact same reason. They assume that it will result in them being persecuted, which I always find funny because they are the largest church in America and they
Hmm.
still think, oh, but if there was Christian nationalism, our churches would get shut down.
Hmm.
So I always hear this argument, but
Hmm.
then what I see in actual history is, for example, in Tsarist Russia, Protestants weren't persecuted in Tsarist Russia. Protestants didn't have their churches shut down unless they did acts of terrorism, like
Hmm.
Anabaptists. There's a famous example where Anabaptists
Hmm.
burned down an Orthodox cathedral, and then the army came and beat the crap out of them and arrested them and took them to the gulag. And I say, good. They were committing terrorism
Yeah.
against
Yeah.
Orthodox Christians. They should get arrested.
Hmm.
But like up until they did that stupid thing, there was no law against them. There was nothing. The only thing in the Russian Empire was Protestants were allowed to practice their religion as long as they didn't try to convert Orthodox Christians to Protestantism. And so there was actually
Hmm.
um, a lot of Americans don't know about this, but there was a huge population of German Lutherans who lived in Russia during
Hmm.
the time of the Tsar. There was a huge population of German Baptists who lived in Russia, and there was a huge population of um well, this would come much later, but
Mhm.
much later there was a huge population of Pentecostals in Russia, and each
Right.
of those groups um are they lived in Russia because
Hmm.
they were persecuted in their home countries
Hmm.
by either Catholics or other Protestants, and they literally begged the Russian Tsar to let them live in Russia so that they wouldn't be persecuted. And
Hmm.
the Tsar was like, yeah, sure, you can live in Russia as long as you don't try to convert Orthodox Christians. And they were like, cool, we're fine with that. Even Jews. Like, Jews are the one group who you might actually be able to argue were persecuted in pogroms and stuff. But even Jews would flee to Orthodox countries to escape Protestant countries. And here's the thing, Orthodoxy is not friendly with rabbinic Judaism, and for very good reasons.
Right.
And nevertheless, like there are whole towns in Russia that are explicitly Jewish
Right.
and that are allowed to operate
Right.
because they weren't trying to convert Orthodox Christians. So there was no problems with them as long as they weren't trying to convert Orthodox Christians. Now with the Jews, you also have some other stuff that goes on, like that they can't do
Hmm.
usury and stuff because Christians don't allow you or aren't supposed to allow usury. So all I'm saying with all of that is I do think that actually um, the idea of persecution isn't this grand defeater of Orthodox Christian nationalism
Yeah.
because there are
Oh,
ways that Christian
mhm.
nationalism can be implemented that don't involve
Yeah.
persecution.
Uh,
Um, and I think that
although
Christian
knowing
nationalism
no.
would make society better because we've got to start shutting down the banks, we've got to start shutting down the usury, we've got to start shutting down the Muslims, we've got to start shutting down the
Yeah.
mosques, we've got to start kicking these people out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I'm all for that, and I would even be like
Hmm.
I would even be okay with it if like Catholics, at least for a time, were the ones who were sort
Hmm.
of the state church, or depending on what group of Protestants, if Protestants were, as
Right.
long as Orthodoxy wasn't persecuted. Um, so
Yeah.
I'll disagree with Father Stephen on that. As brilliant as he is, I'll
Yeah.
just go ahead and disagree with him on that. And I
I.
think too that we could actually have an Orthodox nation even before we're like a vast majority. We could have that if we
Mhm.
were able
Yeah.
to implement it the right way. But